So we're absolutely delighted this evening to be joined by Sally Pointer. Sally is an award-winning experimental archaeologist and heritage educator who specialises in tracing craft techniques from their earliest origins to the present day. Her work bridges research and hands-on practice, exploring how ancient skills and materials can be understood through making. Sally teaches widely through in-person workshops, her books, online courses, and her popular YouTube channel, sharing her passion for traditional crafts and archaeological reconstruction with audiences around the world. When not teaching, she's often found hedge-bothering, which is her term for exploring natural landscapes in search of inspiration and materials. And Sally is also an Honorary Associate Research Fellow in the Department of Archaeology at the University of Exeter, where she continues to combine creative practice with academic research. Welcome, Sally. How are you?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. We're very happy to have you here. And I understand you're recently back from Sri Lanka, which sounds
I
very...
am. Yes, it's a lot cooler here. I was looking like a slightly squashed strawberry for most of the time I
Yeah.
was away.
Yes, we're suffering from some very dull weather at the
Mm.
moment, and just hoping to get through January and February and have a bit of spring as soon as possible, I think.
We're past the dark days now. It's on the way.
Yes, exactly. Fantastic. So we'll start with some questions. So
Mm.
I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about how you got started in your related fields of craft and archaeology. Was it your scholarly interest in history that led you to craft, or have you always made things from a child?
Oh, goes right back to childhood. I was incredibly lucky to have parents who encouraged us to find out through doing, and both my parents were very skilled with with their hands. Dad was a structural engineer. Mum still is a fantastic craftswoman, and I learnt an awful lot of things at a very, very young age. I think I was one of the last generation that was regularly taught automatically to do things like knit and sew and cook and do things really from the word go. But one of the real turning points for me came was as a fairly young child, we moved to the Middle East with Dad's work. So we were in Saudi from the age of, I think I was six when we moved there, about 10 when we came back. And for a lot of that time, we were living in the empty quarter. So we were nearly 200 miles from the nearest town. And what you did for a special treat at the weekend was you persuaded your dad to drive you out into very, very, very deep desert. And if you got the placing just right, the sands would blow and you might see a prehistoric campsite revealed. There'd still be a fireplace. And around that, you might find a scattering of things like flint arrowheads that you could pick up. But because this is the desert and the way the desert forms, you go back 20 yards and there'll be dinosaur bones similarly laid out in the same place. So this was utterly fascinating to me as a child. And then if we went into one of the souks, this is the early 70s, you would still see Bedouin women sitting on the floor and spinning in the marketplace. And I can remember seeing women spinning on one of these trips, going back thinking, I want to do that. But of course, this is the middle of nowhere in Saudi. I didn't have any resources. So, in the way that small children often do, I got up in the middle of the night, thought, no, I've got to do this now or else, and taught myself to spin with cotton wool balls. And I think something like a bangle as a spindle because I got it into my head and I had to learn how to do it that minute or else. And my parents were incredibly tolerant of this sort of thing. And when I came home, if I'd say something like, oh, I've been reading up on this natural dye and I want to do this, Mum would say, it's okay. Of course, you can build a fire at the bottom of the garden and try it out. Here's an old saucepan. I was just incredibly lucky to have that background. And I love seeing people who are giving their children the same opportunities today to learn by trying things out. Doesn't matter if the end results aren't great, you still learn a huge amount.
Amazing. Seems like the perfect combination of exposure and opportunity and have that depth of field to be able to see kind of history right in front of you and other cultures, indigenous cultures. Sounds amazing mix. Fantastic. So you've coined the delightful term hedge-bothering, which I mentioned in the introduction, to describe your engagement with the
Mm.
landscape. Could you explain a little bit more about what this practice entails and how this way of looking at the hedgerow can change the way we understand the daily lives of our ancestors?
Yeah. So hedge bothering start as a phrase started as a joke many years ago. My late husband, my then husband, would he wasn't very good in the mornings. I'm an early morning person. I'd get up very early, about dawn quite often. He didn't. So I'd get up and go out for a walk and he'd say, "Oh, are you off bothering hedges again? Go on, say hello to them for me. Go off and bother your hedges. I'll see you when you get back." But what it really means is about going for a walk with more intention than just walking. You're there to see, what can you see in the hedges? What plants have grown since the last time you went through? Can you see an interesting stick, which you might actually collect, but you could see how you could use it for something? What materials are the birds and animals using? Is there something starting to ripen in the hedges that might be good for foraging later on? And it's far less about actually picking and harvesting things than it is about observing and trying to attune yourself to just what's visible at that point in the year, because we live in an incredibly artificial world today. Almost all of us get up at the same time every day. We go to bed at the same time. We have our lunch at the same time. If we're in an ordinary paid employment, we'll turn up at work at the same time. We forget that the seasons are passing outside our window, unless it's tipping down with rain like it is here at the moment, or it's freezing cold, or it's boiling hot. So by just going for a walk and saying, what's changed? What's changed in the hedges? You get, in the tiniest way, a little bit of a connection with the world that most of our ancestors were familiar with on a day-to-day basis. It's only in the last 100 years that we've lost this connection. I think we can regain it quite easily by just paying a little bit of attention to what's going on out there.
Definitely. And I think throughout history, we couldn't have afforded just to go out looking for one resource and be blinkered to everything else that's going on. You've got to have that awareness to take advantage opportunistically of things that present themselves to
Mm.
you in order to kind of furnish yourself with the necessities of life and kind of the luxuries as well.
Yes, and from even a more modern perspective, foraging's become very popular in recent years. If you want to pick the best sloe berries for your sloe gin in the autumn, actually the best way to find out where they're going to be is look for the sloe blossom, the blackthorn blossom, in the spring. So that connection across the year makes you a better forager, gives you access to the best materials, and you can then harvest with a light hand without denting
Mhm.
one little pocket of things. You've got a better sense of what's out there.
Yeah, and that longevity of being familiar with a place over time, it gives you an extra dimension
Mhm.
in your vision, I suppose.
Yeah.
So you've spoken about the role of empathy and sensory archaeology, learning through touch, smell, and muscle memory. Could you say a little bit more about how the physical act of making, whether that's stirring soap or scraping fibers, unlocks information that simply looking at museum artifacts can't?
Yeah. If you just look at an object, we frequently see things in museums and go, wow, that is so detailed, or that's so fine, or that material looks so exotic or so difficult to work with. And that's filtered through the totally normal and conscious bias that we all have. We're all the product of the world that we live in today. And so much of the things that we use are mass produced or are bought in or come from very specialist sources that we forget that many skills were accessible to many people. And there are a lot of things that when you actually try them, you realize that actually they're not necessarily hard to make, but they might be fiddly, they might take a lot of practice to be refined in them, and more importantly they're going to take a lot of time. And what I find over and over again when I teach really ancient crafts to people is that the principle is not hard. You can usually show people the gist of spinning or the gist of gnarlband or the gist of so whatever in few minutes, half an hour. but it's going to take them at least the rest of their day's workshop to get that muscle memory, to get that feeling for it, to get that sense that you have to invest an awful lot of time to get anything to. I mean, we've got a shorthand version of this today. If you're a costumier, people will say, "Do you want it fast? Do you want it cheap? Or do you want it right? Pick two." And that applies to a lot of crafts today. But to an extent, the same sort of thing goes back into much deeper time. If you've got time to work on something, you can have very, very, very beautiful things available to you. And that then gives us insights into how people organize their working year. So, for example, maybe I want to make a looped flax hairnet. Something a bit like the one that I was wearing in the promo picture for this is also one of the projects that's in the new book. Now, that's made out of flax or another plant fiber, but to make it is roughly a 3-day project. Now, at the point of the year where the flax is ripe and ready for harvest, that is a terrible use of my time. At that point in the year, we've got fields to weed, we've got animals to deal with, we've got vegetables to process, we've got all sorts of things that are so busy. But it's a brilliant use of my time in the depth of winter when what I really want to do is stay out of the rain, stay by the fire, don't catch my death of cold. And I want something that I can do with my hands whilst listening to Great Uncle Eric tell that story about the hunt for the 3000th time and not wanting to clobber him in the process. To do that, I have to collect those fibers at the right time of year and store them somewhere where the mice and the goats aren't going to eat them until I've got time to work on it. When you put all of that together, we start getting real insights into how these crafts aren't just a well practiced expression of people's ingenuity. They also reflect how people are processing materials and resources in a much, much wider setting.
Fantastic. I can see some questions coming in about generalization versus specialization. I've got a very poor overview of
Mm.
prehistory and early history, but my sense is that prior to the invent of agriculture, people were generalists, they had to be, and with agriculture, then there was the opportunity to specialize a bit more. Is that the case?
I think both are correct. That yes, in a very early population, your best survival tactic is being able to do a bit of everything. If you don't know how to prepare vegetables for dinner, if you don't know how to set a trap, if you don't know how to deal with a freshly killed animal, if you can't manage these things, you're not going to be a good part of your society. But at the same time, people have always had a tendency to be really good at some things. And even in a hypothetical early population that has a lot of generalists, you're going to have somebody who makes the best flint tools. You're going to have someone who makes the best cordage. You're going to make someone who makes, the best bone carvings. So I think both can be true. And it's as we come into more town-based economies where people are relying more on bartering skills and experiences, that's the point at which you'll get, oh, here are the quarter where the potters live, and this is the quarter where the weavers live, and just outside are the fields, and they bring in the grain and they swap it with the weavers and they swap it with the potters. Uh, Then you get specialism starting much more um, uh, quickly. But yeah, I think you take it really far back. The evidence suggests that an awful lot of people can do an awful lot of things, and they have to be able to do that as a survival tactic.
Fantastic. So, in your own foraging and your own craft, what's the most surprising material that you've worked with? Is there any specific plant or resource that modern people view as a weed or as a waste material, which has actually been a cornerstone of ancient technology?
Well, I love working with things that we consider weeds today, but that's a fairly recent viewpoint. I think one of the things that a lot of more modern people have totally forgotten about is the role of things like bone. And bone for many millennia filled the role that things like plastics do today. It was easily available, there was always bones around. It's resilient. It has a certain it's rigid, but in the right settings, it can have a little bit of sort of movement to it. You can make things with it that are easily shaped, long lasting, hygienic. A bone spoon cleans up much more easily than a wooden spoon does, but is fundamentally made out of the things that we throw away. Now, we still make those objects today, but we make them out of plastic. And we all know the problems that are inherent in plastic materials. So I think for a lot of the viewers watching this, bone is something they're going to be very familiar with because we're attracting an audience that's familiar with materials and is familiar with the idea of traditional skills and techniques. But when I talk to, say, an average school, they can't get their heads around the idea that something left over from a roast dinner could be the next day a hairpin that I could be wearing for the rest of my life, or could become a button for my shirt, or a toggle for something, or fishing hooks or tools. And I think it's well worth us remembering that there are things that today we throw away that were very much important resources, really not all that long ago.
Definitely. And in terms of clothing, many people think of prehistoric clothing in terms of animal hides. But your work with nettles, for example, has shown how sophisticated plant textiles were. Could you share some insights into the scale of labor involved in creating nettle textiles? And does that physical effort change how you value cloth today?
Yes, I think we've got a picture of some nettles just for a bit
Yeah,
of a
I
change
will
of
share
scenery,
that.
just for a few seconds.
Might take a while to appear.
I'm glad you're organising this. I'm terrible with the screensaver sharing part of things.
Mm. Is that visible yet?
There we are. Yes. Okay.
Okay.
So, Exhibit A. Here we have some nettles, and the image on the right side of the screen is a stalk of nettle with the green, well, you could call it bark if you like, being peeled off it, and that's where the fibres lie. Now, a few years ago, I was doing a lot of work with nettle textiles, and we decided to run a little bit of a citizen science project just to get a sense of how much time does it take to harvest enough nettles for a project and just get them to the stage where this green outer bark, which holds the fibres, have been released from the stems, made ready for use. But before you get to anything like cleaning the fibres, spinning or splicing them, weaving them, etc. So we asked people all around the world who had access to nettles to pick some nettles by whatever method seemed good to them, because we don't necessarily know how people picked them in the past, and just to pick them, take off the outer leaves, and split and peel them so that this green bark became available, and to time how long it took them to do this. And we got some quite diverse results. The longest it took somebody was 15 minutes to do one nettle, but then when we questioned them, that was the very first time they'd ever touched a nettle in their life, and they were a bit scared of it. So if we cautiously just move that particular one out of the way, most people came in between 2 and 4 minutes to pick a nettle, take the leaves off, take this green layer away from the centre pith, and put it by ready for further processing. Now, we can extrapolate from that a little bit further. We know that a typical nettle in the UK will produce roughly 1 gram of usable fibre. Can vary, but very, very roughly 1 gram. So if you imagine a piece of finished textile about the size of a modern tea towel or dishcloth, to those of you not in the UK, that sort of cloth weighs roughly 100 grams. So that's going to take 100 nettles. Using the calculations that we worked out, before you even start spinning and weaving that fabric, you've got something like 4 to 6 hours work in collecting the nettles. And that's a piece the size of a tea towel. Imagine something that would make a shirt that would clothe any of the adults listening today. You've got at least 6 times that. So just the act of collecting the materials is intensive. And this is something that we totally gloss over today as modern craftspeople, because unless you're one of the relatively few who start by growing or sourcing your materials from scratch, if I wake up in the middle of the night and think, oh, I want to make this hat that's doing all the rounds at the moment, but I haven't got the yarn, 10 minutes online with my credit card, and this will turn up on my doorstep the next day. Materials today are accessible. They cost money, but they're accessible. Materials in the past may have been technically free, but there is a huge investment that's involved in gathering them, preparing them, putting them by ready for use later. And I think this little tiny experiment we did, just encouraging people just to think about that with nettles, really helped to start seeing just how valuable cloth is. Today, cloth is expensive. If you're a dressmaker, and I know there'd be lots of people listening to this online who make their own clothing, fabric is not cheap, and it's not meant to be. If fabric is cheap, something's wrong.
Yes, we did a previous in conversation with Alan Brown about his nettle dress
Mm.
that he made over many, many months and the
It's
beautiful
an
film that was
amazing
produced.
project. It's such a wonderful project, and he does fantastic work highlighting just how many resources are available from within your local landscape, but also how much care, effort, and love you have to put in to get something that's going to be a textile that you're going to be wearing for years. So yes, anybody who hasn't seen Alan's work, go and look him up. It's inspirational. It really is.
Definitely. So we're going to do one more question and then we'll come to the chat for any questions that have come in. So that's your reminder to please add your questions to the chat in the next few minutes. So Sally, one of your research interests involved challenging the myth that ancient people were primitive, in air quotes.
Mhm.
From complex chemical reactions in soap making to intricate textile structures, what's the biggest misconception about the Stone Age mind that your work has helped to bust?
Again, this is an area where we have many contradictory ideas within current thinking, even within quite academic people. On one hand, most of us grew up with the Captain Caveman sort of images where people from very, very deep in time were shown lightly wrapped in a fur, living in caves, having very simple interactions with their world and their landscape. And with every year that goes past, we're finding out that this is just not true. Biologically, we are more or less the same people as we were 35, 40,000 years ago. We are not culturally the same as those people. There's no way that if I was dropped back into an early modern human situation, that even though I feel that I understand a lot of their techniques and their craft, there is no way we'd understand each other, and that's nothing to do with language. They would look at my lifestyle and it would be alien. I would look at some of their beliefs and their approaches to things, and I would struggle to get my head around that. But at the same time, we are the same physical people. Anything their hands could do, our hands can do, and vice versa. We only have to look at things like some of the beautiful gold work from the Neolithic to see that people are absolutely capable of ruling straight lines and drawing fractions and angles. And there's some beautiful gold lozenges from the Stonehenge environment that we struggle to reconstruct today using modern engineering steel rules and protractors. But they were doing it. They've got advanced mathematics available to them. I think one of the things that it does show up, though, is that for the vast majority of people in these earlier versions of our world, they're not um, they're not overwhelmed by a world of mass-produced objects the way we are. So today, if you look at anything that's in front of you, unless it's something that you've probably made yourself, almost anything that's been machined will have utterly precise edges. Yarn that's been machine spun will be of an equal thickness all the way along. Your paper will be of an equal weight all the way through it. And that influences the things that we make with it. If you start with utterly precise materials, you tend to get very precise end things. When I look at some of the things that are being made by our very early ancestors, they are technically more than competent, but they're not regular. And I think this is a really, really important point for us to get our heads around, that they didn't have to be. They could do regular if they wanted to. We can see that over and over and over again. But if you're making a bag and there's a little bit of thick and thinness in it, in fact, sometimes that's a good point. You might want to thick a bit on the bottom and thinner at the sides. So yeah, I think one of the biggest myths that we need to bust is that just because some of the objects we see in museum cases aren't machine made perfect, it doesn't mean they're not technologically excellent. And we can learn a lot by embracing that the more natural feel of these objects.
And just because it's a different time doesn't mean there wasn't great variation in skill level as there is today.
Of course, yes.
Fantastic. So I'm going to come back to you and we're going to talk about the new book shortly, but I'm going to come to our colleague Biz, who is our roving reporter in the chat, to let us know if there's any good questions that have come through.
Yes, there's quite a lot. So I do encourage people to go look at the chat too, because you might want to add your own feedback. We've got some questions about material use and things like that. So again, we have a wonderful community in this space tonight. So please go and check the chat and add your feedback as well. I think one that got early traction previously that I think people might get some good insight from you, Sally, is that you're talking earlier about encouraging people to get excited about craft and making and being curious and your own experience with it and being lucky that you have family that supported that. People were asking when you're trying to set up a space to teach craft, some people are asking, how do you balance wanting to give that space to play and be curious and let the person kind of guide where they want to go with their craft, but at the same time, it's like a set timeline workshop. They've paid for a certain amount. You want to get in as much as possible because they only have, X amount of time with you. Is there a suggestion you have in terms of balancing that natural curiosity and play with learning a skill, but also creating a good workshop?
Mm. I, because I'm first and foremost an archaeologist as well as a crafts person, almost all of my workshops start with the sciencey bit. We have the talky bit at the beginning where we look at the nature of the evidence, and I usually show slides where we look at why we think what we currently think about the development of a particular craft. Then I'll usually introduce people to the absolute basics. And sometimes, depending on the craft, we will do that in quite a regimented way because there are a few techniques where you really have to do certain things in a certain order. So, for example, I taught sprang at the weekend, and we did a little bit about the history and the archaeology, and we looked at examples from the earliest known sprang in the Neolithic right through to some late Tudor pieces, which are really bonkers and great fun. Then I had everyone set up a sprang frame, but then I made them all stand behind me, and we very precisely did the basic motions that make the craft work. But once people have got that, I try and encourage people just to see where it goes for them. I don't want them to spend the entire workshop listening to me go on about my insights into where archaeology and craft overlap. I want them to get their hands onto the materials to build a little bit of muscle memory and to learn to read their work. And I think it's really important that we encourage people to make mistakes. And again, using this Sprang workshop as an example, the very first sample project I have people do, I say very, very specifically to them, you have permission to mess this up. This first piece does not have to be a piece you take home to show people. This first piece is just about you working out what grip works for you, because I've shown you what works for me, but my hands aren't your hands. Get those motions working. Let's troubleshoot what happens if you keep scrambling it. You do not have to make this into a finished piece. And as modern adults, we give ourselves such a hard time. We look at a craft and we think, I'm going to make what I've seen in the picture. And what you see in the picture was made by someone who's been doing this for donkey's years. I mean, anyone who's ever made basketry, you see these beautiful, beautiful baskets and the books and the websites, and then you get your bundle of willow and you look like a bird's nest on a bad day because you're learning things from it. So, yes, trying to give people space to make mistakes and realizing at the point at which you can see you've made a mistake, it means you're learning to read your work. And once you can read your work, you can get it right. So you have to make the mistakes before you can do the good stuff, and try and write in a situation where people don't feel that they failed if their first piece is a mess.
Wonderful
I love
advice.
that.
Thank you. No, that's fine. Any more questions, Biz, before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, just a couple of quick ones. I think some people a lot are curious about your book and reading materials, resources for learning, which I think we'll cover in the next little segment. But before that, I think some people are just curious about maybe your kind of favorite artifacts or skills, or what are you kind of leaning towards right now in your making learning journey?
Oh gosh, I'm interested in everything, and I'm I'm trying to think if I do have a favorite artifact or not. There are things that blow my mind. There are things that totally blow my mind. So, for example, the older piece of string that you could theoretically hold, not that they'd let the likes of me anywhere near it, is half a millimeter thick. It's a three-ply construction. It's 50,000 years old and it was made by Neanderthals. Now, the fact that that's survived to this date, let alone the fact that we can study it and ask questions, because there are still a lot of questions about that particular piece of string. But the fact that something like that has survived it just blows my mind every time I think about it. But then I love just some of the everyday things. I love the pottery roof tiles that a child or a cat has walked across, and you see the marks of real lives being captured in the moment. Or you see something where somebody's made a bit of a bodge and they've gone, nobody's ever going to see. And then the bodged bit is the bit that has happened just to survive in archaeology, whereas the rest of it, which was probably beautiful, hasn't. I love that connection with real people and real lives and real skills, and usually a solution to a problem that was in front of them at that moment.
Fantastic. Thank you for those questions. It is really fascinating to have that immediacy with a thought process that happened maybe tens of thousands of years ago, that connection with another maker of another time, but on a very human level. Wonderful. So I think people are very keen to hear about the book. Here it is. Wonderful. It's you've got yours as well.
Yeah, it's very
Uh,
exciting.
so it's published by the Herbert Press, part of Bloomsbury, as part of Heritage Crafts collaboration with them. It's called Knarl Binding. It's not knitting. And for those in the audience who might mistake the two crafts, could you explain the fundamental structural difference
Mm.
between them? And why does that difference make knarl binding such a survivor in the archaeological record?
Okay. So both are crafts that use loops manipulated through each other, but knitting and crochet, in almost all examples, are loops pulled through loops. And if you get your working end and pull it without something in the way, the whole lot will unravel. You can unravel knitting, you can unravel crochet. Knarl binding is generally worked in a way that's much more closely related to knots. You'll tend to pull a loop all the way through a previous loop or stitch, typically with a needle, though that's not always necessary. And because of this, it lends itself to being used with relatively short lengths. Now, there is a historical and archaeological progression to this. We're reasonably sure that the very oldest examples of knarl binding are done with plant fibres using a cord as you go process. So you'll make a bit of cordage, take a few stitches, make a bit of cordage, take a few stitches. So your piece of cordage is technically seamless and continuous. But we get a really big change within the craft, probably in the Bronze Age, when we move to using wool as our primary textile material rather than plant fibres. And we start weaving on a warp-weighted loom, which I'm sure almost everyone here can probably picture, but if not, it's an upright structure that you generally lean against a wall, and the warp threads hang down and are weighted at the bottom. When you take fabric off a warp-weighted loom, you're left with something called thrums, and thrums are the short lengths of warp. They are typically about an arm's length long. But yarn is precious. Somebody has had to process and spin and perhaps dye every single last inch of that. You're not going to throw it away. But short arms lengths don't necessarily lend themselves to going back on a weaving loom, but they are absolutely perfect for this loop in loop technique. And for those of you that haven't done it before, if you sew, if you imagine blanket stitch in the simplest form, knot binding can be as simple as blanket stitch working top of blanket stitch. So imagine you're just working a row of that. We can see this in practice in some of the children's socks that survive from Coptic period Egypt, so late Roman period Egypt, where they're frequently stripy. And although we can't tell for certain, they may have started with a ball each of red, yellow, and blue and cut chunks off. But it's so tempting to envisage those as being a little pile of offcuts from fancier pieces of weaving that have been reused by a parent to make lovely little toe socks in really cheerful stripes for a child. We were putting our kids in stripy socks 2,000 years ago, just like we are today. So it's a very, very adaptable technique. There are many versions of it. It's found worldwide. We have versions of it that turn up in places like Peru. We have versions that turn up in places like New Guinea and Australia, as well as the European examples. It had a very long living tradition in the northern European countries, so places like Scandinavia have an extremely long history of it, but it also turns up in places like Britain. And I love the fact that this is a technique that seems to have been invented worldwide at many different points by many different people to use similar materials and to fill similar needs.
Fantastic. It's really fascinating when a certain technology crops up independently in different parts of the world. We've got our colleague Mary Lewis here, whose dad reintroduced coracle making to the England-Wales
Mm.
border. And you see that kind of boat crop up in all different parts of the world on a very, very similar basis. It is fascinating. It makes you think it's something intrinsic within the human psyche that will develop these things regardless of the environment.
Yeah. And I love that that really brings us together in a world where, and I absolutely don't want to go into political stuff today, but we've all seen the mess the world's in at the moment. When you look back, we go, actually, we were all doing some of these things. We all craft. We all need things to carry things. Why can't we focus on the stuff that we have in common rather than the things that divide us?
Very good. Good manifesto to live by, I think. So you've included some projects in the book ranging from the Stone Age to the Viking era. Could you talk us through the journey of a specific project, perhaps the Neolithic string bag or Viking mitten?
Yes, yes.
And
I think we've got a picture, haven't we, of one of the page
yes,
spreads.
I will share that now. Bear with us. Zoom takes a while to catch up.
Yes. So this is one of the projects from the bag. It's a project in simple looping, and it's inspired by fragments from the Mesolithic and the Neolithic onwards. Now, in the book, because we're very aware that there's materials that people were using in Europe in the Stone Age that somebody in oh, I don't know, New York today or Portugal today or whatever may not have access to, we developed this particular project to use raffia, which can be bought in many craft shops today. Now, raffia wasn't in use in Europe in the Bronze Age. It comes from subtropical areas, but it is a very similar bast fibre in terms of how it handles. So what we've tried to do, as well as showing some archaeological examples, And in the book, we do include, where relevant, pictures of things from museum collections. And we look at the techniques, but we try and give the projects a little tiny bit of a twist because we want them to be accessible. We want people to look at these and go, hey, I quite fancy a bag to keep my onions in as well. But what can I use? Well, I can nip to the florists and I could get some raffia, or actually, I could use torn up strips of paper and I could do this cord as I go technique and have a try at what really aren't terribly complicated structures, but you do need access to materials to do them with. And by trying these things out, you can get a real insight into how long things took for people, what they might have used these things for, and see how you could work these into your own craft practice. Because there's so many things that are quite straightforward techniques, but you could look at them and go, well, she made an onion bag, but actually, I could really see that as somewhere to store my fleece, or I could see that as somewhere to store the chunks of wood that I'm going to get round to carving into spoons, or something else. We can overlap these into so many other areas of craft work.
Fantastic. And was there a double page spread that you
I
wanted
think
to
I
show?
There
What
was
was that one?
that one, yes. So that's one of the pages from the book, just to give you an idea of the type of material we've gone in for. So on the bottom left, we've got an archaeological example. And even though at first glance that looks fragmentary, when you really look at it, we can learn so much about it. There's an edge in it. We can see how they've approached things like making the bag bigger, that they've used a twisted technique. And then we've tried to put in some what are quite frankly pretty pictures of the types of things that I make when I'm demonstrating. But again, the same technique. You do it chunky, you've got a market bag. You do it small and delicate, it could be a hairnet. It can be the same technique. Just by changing the density that you work it at and maybe altering the materials slightly, you can get very, very different end results.
Wonderful. So, null binding is listed on the Heritage Crafts Red List of Endangered Crafts, and it was quite an interesting one when we were first considering it, because unlike some crafts that have been on a steady decline since the Industrial Revolution, this is one that maybe been lost for generations or
Mm.
just practiced in very isolated instances, and is on the uptake, is on the uprise. But do you see books like the one that you've done and the rise of online craft communities as the key to moving it to the viable category, to popularizing it? And what is it particularly about this ancient technique that you think seems to be capturing the modern imagination?
I think one of the things that's made a massive difference in recent years is the rise of online tutorials, whether they're done through reels on social media or whether they're done on YouTube or whether they're done through things like Zoom teaching or what have you. I think there's quite a few different techniques out there that people may have come across in passing, but have found a little bit incomprehensible unless they can see them actually demonstrated. And now that we all have the technology in our pockets to video something or to watch over somebody's shoulder or to look at different viewpoints, it's making it accessible. And particularly with a craft that relies very much on hand motions to put things together, what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another. I'm reasonably ambidextrous, so when I'm teaching in person, I don't have any huge trouble teaching left-handed people. But I do know people who are left-handed to a sense that unless somebody else holds their hand at the same angle, their brain can't connect up the angles. So if I can't show them the right hand motions, we can have a look online and we can find somebody else demonstrating who just happens to be looking at things from a perspective that makes sense to the individual. And I think that access to lots and lots and lots of different teachers and different ways of doing things, and even sometimes just different words that we could say exactly the same thing, but one person uses a turn of phrase that makes sense to you, and somebody else uses one you think, I know the words you're saying, but they don't join up in my head properly. I think that is such a gift for us as both craft teachers and craft learners, that if you come across a technique and you go, well, I sort of know what that is, but I don't really understand. A cup of tea and 20 minutes on the internet later, you can have at least a sense of what's involved, and whether you want to look into this craft in more detail. And then supporting that through books allows people to learn at paces that suit them, because an online tutorial might be great for getting an overview or to hone in on a specific nitty-gritty of a stitch. But for longer projects, people still quite often do prefer a book. You can open it, you can stick a bit of yarn in it or whatever. You can go back to it, go, okay, I've done this stage. What's my next stage? Go on to the next bit. I've done that bit. What's my next bit? I think there's going to be a place for both for a very long time.
And related to that, you've got a large following on YouTube and have taught thousands of people online. How would you say the digital transition has changed the way you teach these tactile skills? And is it possible to convey the feel of the material through the screen?
Yeah, I have to say, nobody was more surprised than me when my YouTube channel took off. When I first did it, I was having a conversation with somebody online about making fibre from horseradish leaves, from the midribs of horseradish. And as best I remember, somebody was saying, I can't quite picture what you're talking about. Which bit do I scrape? I don't get it. I said, look, I'm about to go for a walk. I'll take my camera. I'll take my phone with me. I'll try and do a couple of minutes of video. We'll see if that helps. And then 30 seconds later, I had a YouTube channel. How did that happen? And mine is quite eclectic. I've never done the thing that you're meant to do, where you're supposed to have a set niche and you're supposed to do the same thing over and over and over again. You'll get what I'm working on at the time. And sometimes that means you hear about soap for a couple of weeks, and sometimes that means you hear about nail biting for a couple of weeks. And sometimes I'm off on my travels, so you'll get a silly picture of something else going on. And I make it up as I go along. I don't pretend that I get everything right. I very deliberately try and leave in the bits that go wrong, because this is real life. This is real life. This is real craft. It's not scripted. I'll occasionally film something, and then you'll hear me say, "Well, that didn't go to plan. Let's have another go, and we'll see. We'll see if we can put that right." But I think people do find that quite comforting. We're all real people. We all get it wrong sometimes, and I'm learning. I'm learning all the time. I can see a picture just while I'm talking about YouTube. Somebody says, have you got any tips for filming close-up handcrafts for YouTube? I'm still muddling through with that. I don't use any fancy materials. Everything I do online is still done on my phone, much to the disgust of my brother, who thinks I should be using a flash camera. But I still haven't worked that one out. Frequently, I have my phone rubber banded to a stick that's wedged into a cupboard. I do have a couple of a bit like the things you'd hold a phone on a car dashboard with, that I clamp at funny angles. There's probably a lot to be said for these overhead visualizers that you see in schools sometimes, that you can put something underneath and they're absolutely flat. Haven't got one of those yet. I'm going to try it at some point. What I would say though, if you want to try doing something similar, is just have a go. The lovely thing about filming on your phone is you can do it again. If it goes wrong, just delete it and start all over again. It doesn't have to be perfect if you're saying something that people are finding useful.
Wonderful. We've got a really good tutorial on how to film your craft by Nigel Armitage,
Oh,
the
fabulous.
leather
I'll watch that.
worker.
Yeah,
Yeah, we'll dig that out and we'll put it on the members exclusive section of our website
brilliant.
for people. Biz, do we have any more questions? We've maybe got time for one. I've got a couple more to come back to.
Yeah, I thought there was one question earlier that we didn't get a chance to chat about in terms of recommendations, Sally, for people who are curious about your world and the crafts you engage in. The question was asking about with prehistoric crafts and skills, what spaces would you recommend engaging in learning more in terms of books, museums, or community
Mm.
centers, or what kind of resources would you recommend for someone to
Yeah.
get more curious about this space?
Okay, so for things like textiles, there's a very good book by Elizabeth Barber called Prehistoric Textiles. Some of you will be familiar with her women's work, The First 20,000 Years. I think that's the title. Uh, Now, it's not a recent book. It's been out for quite a long time now, which means you can get it very cheaply. But they're very, very accessible. And she lays out what we understood about the progression of early textiles. We've added to that since the book came out, but it's still very, very accessible. In terms of wider uh, material culture and particularly experimental archaeology, Professor Linda Hercombe's Perishable Material Culture is an excellent book. It's not the sort of book you might pick up and read start to finish. It's the sort where you'll open it at one of the pretty pictures of things like different colours of hides and then go, well, I want to read the chapter on different colours of hides, or you'll open it at on the page that has examples of basketry and go, all right, I now want to read up on basketry. But she is very, very good at explaining how we can interpret things that were the major part of our day-to-day existence, but are now the tiniest surviving fragments in archaeology. But those are books, and I know that doesn't always work for everybody. I think museums are getting loads better at encouraging practical demonstrations, opportunities to have a go. Most of the workshops I do are commissioned by museums these days, so that they're being done in the context of their wider collections and sometimes very beautiful settings. And then also the living history world, which is a very broad church. You know, that covers everything from people who really just want to dress up and have a weekend away with their friends, and there is nothing wrong with that, to people who are using it as a vehicle for doing incredibly academic research, but outside the framework of an academic institution. And I think that there are many, many ways to look at this world. As well as the Heritage Crafts Organisation, there's EXARC, the Experimental Archaeology Network. Again, extremely accessible. I think almost everything they do is open access and online. You can read their journals, and a very good way of getting in touch with people who might be working on a particular craft skill that you're just trying to develop. But mostly just have a go, try it.
Fantastic, thank you. We're always in awe of the depth and breadth of the skills in that whole spectrum from historical reconstruction through to experimental archaeology. There's really amazing skills out there, and we want to do more to reach into those communities and bring them into our world a little bit as well. So that's something for us for the future. There's been some requests for some of the references in the chat. Maybe if you could just repeat the title of the Linda Hercombe book.
Yes. So it's perishable material culture. It might be perishable material culture in prehistory. I will just look that one up for you.
That's fine. And this recording will be available on our website afterwards. So if anyone missed anything that was mentioned, you can go back and have a look. Here we go. Louise has put it in the chat. Linda Hercombe, perishable material.
Perfect. That's the one. Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you. And thank you for all your questions in the chat. If we haven't had an opportunity to voice them, don't worry, we'll send a copy of the chat transcript to Sally to have a look at afterwards. And yeah, we might be able to link you up as well afterwards if that's a possibility. So a couple more questions from us if we've got time. You recently taught one of our bursary recipients, Katie Sawyer, the craft of making sprang, and sprang's been mentioned a couple of times in the chat. Can you reflect on how this went and maybe generally on the motivations of young makers coming to you to learn?
Well, it was a lovely treat for me to be able to work just with an individual person over several days. So I'm really grateful to Heritage Crafts for enabling her to come to me for that, because I work with a lot of people, but usually I'm working with people in groups or in the context of a busy demonstration day. So to have the luxury of being able to spend, can't remember, it was 2 or 3 days. We've had several days anyway, to really work on the things that furthered her research interests and her personal development as far as crafts went was great. And from my side, having just one person asking the questions and asking for clarification or modifications to how we do things, it really does, as a teacher, make you reassess how you go about things, because techniques that work for a big group aren't the same techniques that you need when you work with an individual. But yes, lovely session with her, and I think her project's going quite well, last I heard.
Yes, yeah, absolutely fantastic. And she's a huge talent, one to watch in the future.
Mm.
So I've just got a few announcements before we come back to the final question. Let me just spotlight myself there so I can share my screen. We really do appreciate you all coming along to this. It's been a fantastic session and it's been brilliant to have so many people along. Particular thank you to those who have donated on registration. We really appreciate it. We do say the best way to support us is through our membership scheme, and there's links for that on screen now, as well as providing a contribution through the membership fee to our funding. We are an independent charity. It's also really important to have that body of members providing us with our mandate for the work that we do and ensuring that we're continually linked to makers up and down the country. So we really value our members. So if you're not already a member, please do consider signing up. If you're able to give a little bit more by way of donation, there's another link for you there as well. And I'm also delighted to say that as part of this session, we're able to offer an exclusive 20% off discount off the book, Now Bending, It's Not Knitting, by Sally. So if you follow the link, and I'll put this particular link, it has to be through the Bloomsbury website, and use the term now binding at the checkout as the discount code. You'll get 20% off, and that runs to the 10th of February. So do take advantage of that. The link in the chat right now. Wonderful, thank you. So we'll come back to our final question. Just stop sharing myself. There we go. Bear with me. So your work spans from the Paleolithic to the 20th century. If you could be dropped into any specific time period solely to observe a craft person at work for 1 hour, to answer a burning question that you haven't been able to solve experimentally, when and where would you go?
I think it's got to be the Paleolithic. Whenever we put together an approximation of a craftsperson at work, I think I've got one last picture to show. It's the
Yeah.
one of me sat in a cave twiddling baskets and things.
Yeah.
Whenever we do an approximation of this type, we're very, very conscious that there is no way that we can have this right. It is not possible. Everything that we show and we demonstrate is based on tiny fragments of knowledge. And this is a little bit like having a 10,000 piece jigsaw puzzle of which you've got 20 pieces, none of them are the corners and none of them are the edges. There is so much we don't know. And our own personal bias will come into this. So I would love to go back and see that piece of Neanderthal string that I mentioned earlier being made. I would love to see, how are they making that? Are they twisting that in their fingers? Are they rolling it on their thigh? Are they sitting on the floor? Are they sitting on a log? Have they put a lot of thought into this, or did they just grab some fibers because they needed something in a hurry? Is this part of a much wider body of projects that individual's making, or is it just tiny things that are going on? As an archaeologist and somebody who dresses up as part of my living, I know that I cannot possibly have it right. But every year that goes past, we get another piece of that jigsaw puzzle. So the opportunity to go back and just get an overview would be awesome. I've just spotted on the comments somebody saying that the book is out of stock. I spoke to the publisher this morning. They've had a hiccup at the warehouse. This is very temporary, apparently. The book will be back in stock in a day or two.
Fantastic. So do save that URL, that web link to your
Yeah.
computers and try it again in a couple of days' time. Hopefully they'll be back in stock.
Yeah.
Wonderful. That brings us up to the hour mark. Having done over 50 of these sessions, I'm always a bit too likely to say that was my favorite, but that was definitely my favorite. It's
Thank you.
been absolutely fantastic to hear from you and get an insight into your work and practice. Thank you to everyone for coming. Do join us at future sessions. You can get the latest news on our social media, on our Instagram. But other than that, I'll leave you all to get on with your evenings. Thank you very much.
Thank you.